The ceiling light in office block A flickered, as if it too dreaded the start of another day. Caleb Morgan sat at the fourth desk from the door, elbow resting on a worn laminate surface, the other hand holding a reusable plastic coffee cup he'd carried for 3 years. The coffee inside had gone cold long before he remembered to drink it. No one at the El Paso Detention Center began their day in good spirits. Certainly not Caleb. He'd worked here nearly 7 years, and the first thing he learned wasn't Spanish nor legal codes, but how to detach himself from everything. On paper, this place wasn't a prison. But anyone who'd stepped inside knew the difference was only in the wording. The detainees weren't criminals, yet they were treated as if they were threats to be isolated from society. And people like Caleb, employees, interpreters, guards, learned how to work with others without ever meeting their eyes. Caleb had tried at first. That first year, he went home heavy, his head full of voices and tears of those he translated for. He used to remember their names, think of them when he turned off the lights. But he learned soon enough. Too much empathy in a system without any would only crush him first. Now, each day began the same way, opening his old laptop, logging into the internal system, checking the morning assignments, waiting for the loudspeaker to call his name. This morning was no different. He opened the first file, fingers tapping on the desk. Name, Morales Sofia. Nationality, Guatemala. Age, 26. Case status, pending deportation. Date of arrest, 18 days ago, at a bus stop near the Arizona border. She'd been found without papers, traveling with a younger brother, but they were separated after being taken in. Caleb flipped a few more pages. Notes from staff. Uncooperative. Refused to answer questions for the first 3 days. Communicated with eye contact. Currently stable, but displays unusual psychological behavior. He frowned. Not unusual, he thought. Maybe just too quiet compared to the others. The intercom crackled.
Interpreter Morgan, room 6C, female detainee. Morales Sofia.
Caleb stood. He tore a scrap of paper from his notebook and slipped it inside the file. Not for any real reason, just habit, a way of marking something that lingered in his mind. Then he walked down the hall carrying the folder and his cold coffee. The El Paso facility was shaped like a sideways H, the administration block in the center, men's and women's wings branching off, connected by long, narrow corridors. Caleb passed the ID checkpoint, exchanged a look with the guard. They didn't bother with greetings anymore. The women's wing felt different. Not because of gender, but because of silence. The men's side was always loud, shouts, scuffles, complaints. The women's side was still. Many didn't cry, didn't speak. They just looked. Caleb didn't look back. Room 6C unlocked with the key card. A steel table stood in the center, split by thick plexiglass. 2 hard grey plastic chairs, worn and unforgiving. Sofia Morales was already there. No handcuffs, but she didn't need them. She sat straight, hands on her lap, eyes fixed on the glass as if it were invisible. Caleb entered without a greeting. He sat, opened the file, clicked his pen, clipped the mic to his collar.
Sofia Morales.
She didn't nod, didn't deny, just looked at him. Eyes steady, no fear, no hope. Just there.
I'm the interpreter assigned this morning. We'll work for about 30 minutes. I'll translate exactly what you say for the officer handling your case.
No answer, no movement. Caleb exhaled softly.
We'll start by confirming your personal details, then move on to your circumstances of entry. Can you hear me clearly?
Still nothing. Then after a pause, her lips moved, so faintly he almost missed it.
Do you ever listen without understanding?
Caleb's brow lifted. He'd heard her clearly, too clearly. But what unsettled him wasn't the question, it was the voice. She spoke fluent English, soft, a little husky, musical, and it carried the uncanny echo of a voice he thought he'd buried years ago. A late afternoon in Austin Val, the woman he once loved, had turned to him with that same look, asking the same words. "You hear me, but you don't understand, do you?" Caleb pulled his hand back from the mic like it was live wire. He couldn't let memory bleed into this place. This place had no room for anything not written in a file.
What do you mean by that?
Sophia tilted her head slightly, then breathed out. Not a sigh, just a slow release, as if even she didn't expect to be understood.
I only asked. Don't translate it.
And then she went quiet again. The session lasted no more than 25 minutes. Caleb asked questions. She answered. Brief, precise, stripped of emotion. No reaching for pity. When it ended, Caleb stood, gathered the file, ready to leave. But before he stepped out, he turned, just once, and met her gaze through the glass. Sophia still sat still, but this time her eyes weren't looking past him. They were looking at him, Caleb thought, listening without understanding. He walked out, gripping the file tightly. Not because her question was difficult, but because he knew he understood it all too well, and that was what scared him. The next morning, a thin fog clung to the sky. Beyond the hallway window of Block A, El Paso stretched out in a dull, steel-grey light. Neither rain nor sun. Caleb sat alone in the interpreter's room, fingers turning a new file, but eyes still fixed on the old one. Sophia Morales. Something about it felt unfinished, like a song cut short at its peak. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for. A second meeting, a coincidence, or simply the chance to prove yesterday was just a passing tremor. But when the loudspeaker called her name again, Caleb felt neither surprise nor routine. He only stood, slower than usual. In room 6C, Sophia was already there. Same posture, straight, hands folded neatly on her lap. But her eyes no longer pierced through the glass as before. Today, they rested on the table, as if listening to some small sound within herself.
Good morning. Today we'll clarify a few more points in your file. It should only take 15 minutes.
Sophia didn't respond right away. Caleb opened the file, flipped to page 3, the section marked Family Relations. A faint pencil note from a night guard read, Companion, male, about 17, claims to be brother.
Would you like to add anything about relatives? Your brother, perhaps?
His name is Elias, 17 last month. Still thinks he's on a camping trip.
Caleb looked up slightly. Her tone was calm, as though she were telling a story about someone else. But her next words made his pen freeze on the page.
I told him they'd only keep us a few days. Then we'd be called out, put on a bus, reach a city, and be together again. I lied. And I told it so well I almost believed it myself.
Caleb stopped writing. He looked at her, just for a moment, but enough to see something in her eyes. Not tears, but the salt of tears not yet shed.
Do you know where he is now?
Another facility, I don't know which. Someone said they moved him to Arizona. Maybe true, maybe not.
Caleb gripped the folder edge. Stories like this weren't unusual here, but the stillness in her voice made it impossible to dismiss. It wasn't crying. It was the silence that follows after there's nothing left to cry.
I can try to check his file if you want me to.
You would do that?
No promises, but I can try.
She nodded slightly, her gaze softening for the first time. Not out of trust, but simply because she wasn't used to being asked.
Elias is the only brother I have left. I once promised my mother I wouldn't let him travel alone. But then things just happened, like a flood. No time to swim, only time to be swept away.
Caleb closed the folder, switched off the mic, against procedure. He knew he shouldn't stop mid-session. But he needed a second, just 1 second, to pause, not as part of the system, but as a person listening to another human being.
I'll try to find Elias, and if I learn anything, I'll tell you. Not because it's required, but because you deserve to know.
Sophia didn't answer. But when Caleb stood to leave, she watched him. No words, no nod. Just watched, as if, for the first time, she wasn't looking past him, but into the quiet in his eyes. As Caleb left the room, his steps were slower than usual. In his head, yesterday's question played like a refrain. Do you ever listen without understanding? But today it no longer puzzled him. Today he feared he understood it far too well. Caleb sat alone in his small rented apartment behind the city's administrative block. Dinner lay untouched on a metal tray, gone cold. The television was on without sound, replaying an old movie, an endless shot of a beach he had never set foot on. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't tired. But Sophia's question kept looping in his mind, not because he didn't understand it, but because it struck a place he had buried deep, a memory never named, never told, never translated into words. He opened the desk drawer. Amid old papers and pens, long out of ink, was a small photograph, its edges curled with time. In it, a young woman smiled, long hair tied loosely to one side, hand lifted toward the camera. Sunlight spilled over her shoulder. Behind her, the balcony of a third-floor apartment in Austin. Valeria. Everyone called her Val. Caleb remembered the last time they were together. A Saturday afternoon. Val was packing a suitcase to visit her mother in Florida. He helped her fold shirts, the two of them arguing lightly about whether to take the early flight or the late one. Then she turned, holding up an old T-shirt, and asked, half teasing, half serious.
Do you ever listen without understanding?
He had laughed then, brushing it off, giving some careless reply. But during the week she was away, and forever after she never returned, lost in a highway accident, that question clung to him like an unfinished song. He had never spoken a last word to her, never fully understood the thing she tried to say with her eyes, with the way she folded clothes lengthwise, with the way she always turned on the yellow lamp when she came home late. When Sophia asked that same question this morning, the memory hadn't come back as an image, but as sound. Val's voice, low, gentle, echoing like it came from a room he once left without turning back. Caleb pulled a cigarette from an old pack, lit it, but didn't smoke. He only held it, letting the smoke drift through the cracked window. The El Paso night sky was heavy and dark, no moon, no passing cars. He didn't know which frightened him more, that the memory had returned or that it had never left. And now, in the eyes of a stranger named Sophia Morales, he didn't just see a detainee who needed an interpreter. He saw himself, the man who had listened too much, yet never truly understood. The next morning, Caleb already knew he would see her again. Not because the file said so, but because of a strange feeling inside him, as if a song left unfinished was waiting to play once more. In the interpreter's room, he sat in his usual corner, drinking cold coffee from the same faded plastic cup, flipping through case files as if solving equations whose answers no one truly cared about. But from the moment the door opened, his eyes searched. Without orders, without permission. Sophia Morales arrived on time. Same beige clothes, same upright posture, like someone choosing to hold on to dignity in a place where there was nothing left to hold. Caleb switched on the mic, checked the recorder, opened the file, and began in his usual flat, neutral voice. Yet each word seemed to come slower than before, not for Sophia's sake, for his own, as if he needed time to hold the distance. The questions today circled around her journey, the checkpoints, the stops, the companions. Sophia answered with precision, clipped and exact. Nothing added, nothing withheld. What unsettled Caleb wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. There were pauses in her sentences, not from forgetting, but from choosing words carefully, like someone pulling shards of glass from the palm of her hand. Each answer came clean, dry of tears, yet carried the scent of dried blood. He couldn't meet her eyes for more than 3 seconds. Every time their gaze collided, he felt as though he was pulled into a sealed room where echoes lived, full of things no one dared speak aloud. At the end of the session, Caleb closed the file, unpinned the mic. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the confirmation page. Just for a second, then he regained control. Nothing unusual, nothing could be. As Sophia was led away, she didn't say goodbye. She never had. But that morning, just before stepping across the doorway, she paused, ever so slightly, and tilted her head back toward him. Her look carried no question, no blame, no expectation. It was only a statement, wordless yet unmistakable. I know you're listening, even if you won't admit it. Caleb stayed in the room a few extra minutes. The plexiglass reflected only his own face, no trace of Sophia. And he realized what left him hollow wasn't that she had gone, it was that he wanted her to come back, even if only to sit in silence again. That afternoon he interpreted for 3 others, an old man from Honduras, a young woman from El Salvador, and a boy from Oaxaca, each with their own story, each with their own file. But after every question, he felt himself listening with something missing. And when he returned home, emptying his pockets, he found the small slip of paper still tucked inside Sophia's file. Never returned to the binder. It wasn't a technical mistake, it was an aftershock. Thursday morning, sunlight struck the frosted glass of the interpreter's room, casting pale streaks across the grey floor and the worn edge of the wooden table. Caleb walked into room 6C on time, file in hand, mic clipped to his collar. He tried to keep everything by the book, yet the routine was beginning to feel unusual. Sophia was already there, straight-backed, eyes steady, neither resisting nor expecting. But today, the air between them was different. Not because of what would be said, but because something seemed ready to be opened, as naturally as a door blown ajar by the wind.
Today I'll help you complete the section about your journey across the border. If there's anything you don't want to answer, you can say so.
It's fine, I'll tell you.
Her voice was still soft, still in Spanish, but for the first time it carried no caution, no hesitation, no defense, only the release of someone too tired of silence.
We left Guatemala at midnight. The first cargo truck took us all the way to the Honduran border. Me and Elias, my brother. He's 17 but still thinks like a child. Always trying to look like he knows the way, but waiting for me to decide. Our mother died 2 years ago. It was just the 2 of us left. No relatives, no neighbors, close enough to take him in. I said I would go, he said, if you go, I go too. So we went.
Caleb scribbled notes quickly, hand practiced. But his mind wasn't in the words. He was listening to a story that, if not translated, might vanish into nothing like hundreds of other files.
We crossed jungles. Sometimes walked for days without seeing a paved road. Elias got covered in leech bites until his legs were purple. Once he slipped into a ditch. I had to pull him out. I don't know when I became that strong. Maybe because I never allowed myself to think of leaving him behind. Near the Arizona border, we were chased. I held Elias's hand and we ran. When they caught us, they didn't let me say a word to him. No glance, no touch. They separated him from me like unpacking a box. Quick, cold. As if I weren't his sister.
Caleb looked up. Sophia didn't bow her head. She spoke like someone recalling a documentary, without emotion but not emotionless. It was pain cooled into ash, and because it had cooled, it burned longer.
Have you had any information about Elias since then?
Only a rumor from a staff worker that he was moved to a juvenile facility. But no one told me which one. No file number. No letters. No chance to ask twice.
Caleb nodded, jotting down a brief line in the file. But inside him, every word etched deeper than any transcript. And then, softly, Sophia shifted into English.
I don't cry when I talk about him. Not because I'm strong. It's because if I cried, I might never stop.
Caleb froze. This was only the second time she had spoken English. But unlike the first, it wasn't to test him. It was to open herself. That sentence didn't need translation, shouldn't be translated. If written into the record, it would turn into data, when in truth it was something alive, fragile, painfully real.
I understand.
He wasn't sure it was the right answer, but it was the only one he could give. Not procedure, not false empathy, just truth. Sophia nodded slightly. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened as if she knew today she had truly been heard. That afternoon, the detention center lay heavy under the windless heat of the Texas desert. No alarms, no incidents. Everything so still it was unsettling, like a heartbeat drumming too evenly for too long, until you forget you're still alive. Caleb returned to the interpreter's office under the excuse of reviewing supplemental files. No one noticed. A greying man doing the same repetitive work every day, never late, never disruptive. Nobody suspected him of anything beyond typing and drinking cold coffee. He waited until the room was empty. The last footsteps faded down the hallway. Fluorescent tubes flickered above, their pale green light turning the desk surface into cold metal. Caleb logged into the internal system. Each employee had an access code with limits. He didn't have clearance for juvenile records, but he knew how to slip through, not hacking, just knowing the right corners to search and when to stop before the system asked questions. He typed, Elias Morales, Guatemala, 17, separated at intake point 14. Each keystroke struck his chest, not from fear of discovery, but from stepping into territory his heart had no clearance for. The screen blinked once, then displayed Santa Cruz Juvenile Facility, Arizona. Status: in custody. No complaints. No legal guardian. The file was short, clinical, but enough to confirm Elias was alive, waiting for someone to remember him. Caleb printed the PDF. One thin sheet, black letters on white. But he knew, for Sophia, it was an entire world, fractured and reconnected. He didn't take the printout home, didn't slip it into his pocket. Instead, he folded nothing, left no crease, and quietly tucked it into Sophia's interpreter file, sliding it between two signed confirmation pages, as if it had always been there, never added by anyone's hand. His fingers trembled slightly as he closed the folder, not from fear of being caught, but because, for the first time in a very long time, he had done something outside the procedure. No approval, no duty. Simply because it was right. When Caleb left the office, the hallway lights still flickered as before. But his steps no longer carried the same rhythm. Maybe because he knew, from this moment on, he wasn't just the man standing between two languages. The next morning, when Caleb stepped into room 6C, something in him had shifted. Subtle, thin, like a layer of dust settling over something once familiar. He knew Sophia would see the paper today, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that. She was already seated, not rushing to open the file, not searching, just sitting in that quiet way of hers, as if her presence alone was already an answer to unasked questions. Caleb opened the folder, turned to the right page, then looked up. He said nothing. Only waited. Sophia opened her copy on the other side of the glass. Her fingers moved through the pages like someone who had done it dozens of times, though in truth she had probably only read her own file a handful of times. Then she stopped. The printed sheet on Elias lay between two forms, unstapled, unstamped, without annotation. Just a plain system printout, title across the top, and in the corner, Santa Cruz Detention Center, Youth Division. She stared at it for a long moment. Didn't touch it. Didn't ask. Didn't turn toward Caleb. But her spine seemed to straighten like a string drawn taut, then slowly released. And then she closed the file, gently, set it down on the table, lifted her eyes to him.
You found it.
Caleb didn't answer, only nodded once. Quick, small, enough for her to know, but not enough to turn it into an arrangement that could ever be written in his personnel record. Sophia didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She only held his gaze a second longer, then gave a single nod. Not polite, not perfunctory, a recognition that something between them had been translated, though it had never been named. And her eyes softened. Not tender, Not wet, just softened. Like the sky after a desert wind, still bright, but no longer burning. Caleb turned away first, opened his notebook, wrote down a few lines that didn't matter. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, that she hadn't thanked him, or that he felt lighter because she didn't need to. Because sometimes the truest things are the ones that never make it into the record. By late afternoon, desert sunlight streaked a deep red across the administrative wing's hallway. The ceiling tiles were yellowed with age, the floor mottled with scuffed shoes and dust. Inside the El Paso Detention Center, time felt frozen, even as the clock kept moving. Caleb sat alone in the interpreter's break room. A square space with a vending machine, a few plastic chairs, and a bulletin board plastered with internal regulations. He held a cup of cold coffee, staring out through a window streaked with old rain. He wasn't waiting for anyone, not hiding from anyone. But today, silence felt different. It had an echo. It carried the shape of a person. The door swung open, footsteps steady, familiar.
I knew I'd find you here.
Charlie Barnes, the most senior interpreter in the facility. A dozen years older than Caleb, hair silvering at the temples, belly soft, voice roughened by cigarettes. They weren't close, but often shared shifts. Charlie rarely spoke, unless he meant for his words to be heard.
I just needed some quiet.
Quiet here? That's like asking for good coffee from a vending machine.
Charlie pulled a soda from the fridge, popped it open, and sat across from him. No smile, no small talk. His eyes were steady, like the seam running down a pressed uniform, straight, unyielding.
I heard you slipped something into Morales' file.
Caleb didn't answer, didn't deny, didn't nod. He only looked down at his hands, the ink stain on his finger from hurried notes earlier that day. He'd forgotten to wash it off.
I don't care what it was. I've been where you are. Thought I could save someone. Do the right thing, open a door, give them hope. But let me tell you something, Morgan.
Charlie leaned forward, his voice dropped, not threatening, just real.
They come and go, we stay. And every time you try to hold on to one of them, you lose a piece of yourself. Bit by bit. Until there's nothing left to give.
Caleb tightened his grip on the coffee cup, still didn't look up.
If you believe that, then why are you still here?
The question wasn't sharp, wasn't defiant, just honest enough to make Charlie laugh. Dry, humorless.
Because I've got nowhere else to go. And maybe I've stayed too long to know how to leave without breaking something in my head.
Silence lingered. Only the hum of the air conditioner overhead and the flicker of fluorescent light pulsing off-beat. Charlie took a sip of soda, leaned back.
I'm not here to lecture you. I just recognized the look in your eyes today. I had that look once, when I met someone who made me think maybe this time will be different. But then what?
You think she's like everyone else?
No, I think you won't be like yourself if you let this go any further.
Caleb finally looked up. His eyes weren't defensive, but something in them had shifted, like the sky after a storm. Still grey, but beginning to clear.
Maybe. I don't want to be myself anymore.
Charlie didn't answer. He stood, adjusted his belt, tossed the empty can into the trash.
Then remember this, Morgan. In here, everything has consequences. Especially the things that never make it into the record.
He left. The door closed softly, but his words echoed in Caleb's head, not like a threat, but like a warning sign. A yellow light at an intersection, not forcing you to stop, but urging you not to keep going either. Caleb stayed a long time. Outside, night had fallen. Floodlights lit the yard, catching silver sparks on the barbed wire. He noticed a pigeon perched on the rail near the fence. He knew it would fly away. But for now, it was still there, and that, somehow, was enough to keep him from leaving just yet. He opened the next file, typed in the case number. But his hands no longer felt steady. Each keystroke landed off-beat like a heart-skipping rhythm, and when the screen flashed loading data, he realized he had already chosen. No declaration, no justification, no witnesses. But deep inside, Caleb Morgan had crossed to the other side of the glass, into the space where stories don't need translation, yet changed the listener forever. Caleb couldn't remember who first mentioned deportation. Maybe it was a caseworker at lunch, their voice flat, like reading an expiration date off a shipment. Or maybe it was the red note flashing at the corner of his screen when he logged into the system. Pending transfer, awaiting deportation. But he remembered exactly how it felt when he saw the name Sofia Morales beside those words, like a sudden draft slipping through walls that had long soundproofed him from feeling. He read it a second time, then a third, still the same order, still that name. She was going to be sent away. No lawyer, no guardian, no appeal, and certainly no one asking if she had anything left to say. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. In his cramped one-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, he lay awake listening to trucks on the freeway rumble like waves crashing against his chest. Near 2 in the morning, he got up. No plan, no strategy. Only this, if he did nothing by morning it would be too late. He drove back to the facility, swiped his badge at the gate, stepped into the empty interpreter's office, just the hum of an old air conditioner and tired fluorescent light. The system was still open, a rare privilege of his position, but tonight he didn't use it to look up records. He opened a blank page. Sitting before the keyboard, Caleb no longer felt like an interpreter, not a middleman, not the recorder of someone else's words. Tonight, he was the one speaking. To whom it may concern, this letter is written on behalf of Sofia Morales, currently detained at the El Paso Temporary Holding Facility, pending deportation. I write not as an attorney nor as a legal representative, but as someone who has listened to her story. I have heard it without interruption, without translation, and without any assumption other than this. It deserves to be heard. She has no criminal record, no history of violence, no support network back home. Her only family, her younger brother, is currently held in a separate youth detention center in Arizona. She poses no threat. What she carries is pain, resilience, and the simple hope to stay close to what little remains of her family. I know this plea may fall outside the boundaries of standard procedure, but sometimes compassion should be allowed to precede process. If we send her back, we are not only deporting a person, we are erasing a story too few have cared to understand. Respectfully, Caleb Morgan, Interpreter, El Paso Detention Facility. Caleb read it once, no edits, no hesitation. He printed a copy, signed in blue ink, then scanned it back into the system. The final field asked for the sender's identity and purpose. Caleb filled it in. No disguise, no mask. When he pressed submit, his finger didn't tremble, but his heart did. He stayed there until the first light of dawn swept across the concrete wall outside the window. No one knew he was there. No one called. And for the first time in many years, Caleb didn't feel like he was working. He felt like he was human. 2 days after Caleb sent the letter, his computer screen flashed a red notice. Request invalid. Submission exceeded authorized access. Just below it was a PDF attachment. Notice of professional conduct violation, human resources. Caleb wasn't surprised, not angry, only saddened that a part of him had still hoped. Even if it was only a flicker. As if somewhere inside, he still wanted to believe the system, cold as it was, might have room for something unscripted. That afternoon, Caleb was called into a small meeting room behind the administrative wing. The space was barely larger than a storage closet with 3 plastic chairs and a metal table. Fluorescent lights glared white, unfriendly. On the wall hung a single sign, Internal Procedure Review, Section 7B. Across from him sat the internal supervisor, a middle-aged woman with glasses on a chain, her face the kind built to recite rules and strike out errors. Beside her, an HR representative and an IT officer, there to verify the system breach.
Mr. Caleb Morgan, Interpreter Level 2, Employee ID 10437. Are you aware that you accessed the internal system reserved for legal representatives and submitted an appeal on behalf of a detained subject?
I am.
You may remain silent during this review. But if you have an explanation, it will be entered into the record.
Caleb sat upright. He didn't look at the papers, didn't glance at the clock. He looked straight into her eyes, not defiant, not remorseful.
She didn't know how to write what she'd been through. I only did what a human being should do.
Silence fell, as if the room itself hadn't been built to hold anything resembling conscience.
You are not an attorney. You have no right to represent her. And you are not permitted to use your real name to submit petitions on behalf of detainees. You understand that, don't you?
I do.
A report will be sent to higher management. In the meantime, your internal access will be suspended, but you will continue interpreting under supervision.
Caleb nodded. He didn't argue. Didn't ask how long his job might last. In that moment, all noise around him faded, like water dripping from a leaky faucet. He felt no regret. On his way out, the IT officer, a younger man with a trace of hesitation still on his face, slowed his step behind him.
You know, I read that letter. Honestly, I thought it was good. Even if it wasn't procedure.
Caleb didn't turn his head, but his voice softened, low as wind slipping past barbed wire.
Thank you. But sometimes the truth doesn't need to follow procedure.
The next day, Caleb still went to work. On time, badge swipe, security check, a nod to the guard. Everything the same as always, except for the feeling in his chest. Not heavy, not painful, just hollow. He sat at his old desk, but his access to the internal system had been revoked. No more looking up records, no more editing notes, no way to quietly check transfer schedules. He was back to his basic function, a machine for carrying words across. But after everything, Caleb knew he wasn't the same version of himself anymore. That machine had once trembled because of a voice, and now, even forced into silence, the echo remained, small but unerasable. That day's session, Sophia arrived as usual, hair tied back, face bare. She knew nothing, suspected nothing. She never mentioned an appeal because she never knew it existed. They worked for 18 minutes. A few lines added to a behavior report, no story, no lingering looks. Caleb followed every step exactly, no deviation, no additions. But as the session ended, Sophia paused a beat before rising. She didn't look at him. She only asked softly, in Spanish, almost without emphasis.
Do you believe a person can change just because of a stranger?
Caleb looked up, unsure if it was meant for the record or for him. But he knew he wouldn't answer it today, not because he didn't want to, but because if he spoke, the question would lose the fragile shape it carried.
That's a good question.
Sophia nodded, said nothing more. She left, light as a scent unnamed. And Caleb stayed in the empty room, alone, with a question no one demanded answered, and with a letter that would never reach its destination. The afternoon before, Sophia was called to room 4, not for interpretation, not for questioning. No one asked anything. A middle-aged officer in a buttoned shirt read from a printed page, "Tomorrow, you will be transferred to Florence Detention Center, Arizona. All deportation procedures have been completed." Sophia didn't react. She didn't ask why or request more time. She only nodded. A nod that was neither resistance nor surrender. As if the thought had already lived quietly in some dark corner of her mind for a long time. On her way back to the women's wing, her steps were slower than usual. The scrape of worn canvas shoes against the floor echoed faintly. The guard behind her said nothing. No one broke the silence. That night, when the dorm was asleep, Sophia sat alone under the weak yellow glow of a wall lamp. She reopened her file, slid out the inner flap, tore a corner from the last page of her notebook. Careful, silent. She wrote a few lines, round, steady handwriting, then folded the scrap and tucked it between 2 declaration pages. No mark, no explanation, no word to anyone. She knew Caleb would be the one to review the file before it closed. She also knew he would understand. The next morning, Caleb received her file back from the system. No stamp saying appeal successful, no humanitarian note. Only a single line at the top, completed, transfer. His hand shook slightly as he opened it, as if the folder carried a sigh unspoken. And then he saw it. The folded scrap, slipped between 2 pages. If one day my brother is released, and if I am no longer here, please tell him I never stopped waiting. Sophia. No thank you. No recipient's name, no date, no greeting, no signature. But to Caleb it was the clearest voice Sophia had ever left behind. He read it twice, then a third time. His eyes lingered on the last line. I never stopped waiting. It wasn't just a note, not a request, not an expectation. It was a will written in ink and courage, born in silence, entrusted to someone she had never dared call trustworthy. Caleb folded the scrap, slipped it into his leather wallet beside the old photo of Val, the woman who, years ago, had asked him a question much like Sophia's. Do you ever listen without understanding? He didn't know what he would do with it. He couldn't hand it over, couldn't file it, couldn't report it. But he knew one thing. It was not allowed to vanish. A new file was set on his desk. Another interpreter knocked at the door. Caleb stayed still. His hand rested over his chest where the wallet lay. He was no longer translating. He was listening. And in that final silence, for the first time in years, he understood. That morning, as Caleb cleared his desk for the last time, he opened the second drawer from the left, the one that usually held pencils, paper clips, and a few old reports that no one had bothered to file. Amid the clutter lay a small folded note, not from the system, no heading, no form. He recognized it instantly. It wasn't the letter about Elias, the one he had long kept in his wallet. This was something else, something new, arriving here. After everything, Caleb unfolded it. Inside were a few handwritten lines in Spanish. The slanted script, rushed and imperfect, with tiny spelling errors, made it feel more alive than any printed word in any official file. Thank you for listening to me as if I were a person. No name, no date, no signature. But Caleb knew exactly who it was from. He read it 3 times. 4. Each reading brushed away a thin layer of dust from his heart, a heart he had believed long dried out. The paper trembled in his hand, not from wind, not from the air conditioner, but from something larger, an acknowledgement. Something he had never asked for, yet had quietly hoped might come. As if I were a person. The words weren't about him, they were about her, about the silent fear that through all her journey, without tears, without begging, she might still be seen as something less than human. And what Caleb had done was only listen, not polish her voice, not adjust her words, not soften or make them easier to hear. Just listen, and in her eyes, that alone was enough to thank him for. He folded the note carefully, more carefully than any document he had ever kept, slipped it between 2 pages of his notebook, then into his chest pocket. Before leaving the office, Caleb looked around the empty room one last time. The swivel chairs still crooked. The old printer blinking red for paper jam. The wall clock stopped a month ago. Everything was the same, only he was different. The suspension came on Monday morning, not from a tense meeting, not in a raised voice. Just an email. The subject line, in all caps, notice of temporary termination, pending file review. No word like fired. No word like dismissed. But Caleb understood. The words left unsaid always weighed heavier than the ones spoken. He printed the email, folded it into quarters, slipped it into his pocket as if to make it real. He packed his things in 10 minutes. There wasn't much. 1 notebook, a pen, old headphones, and Sophia's handwritten note. On his way out of the administrative block, he passed the long corridor under fluorescent light, the same hallway that had carried him to countless cold interview rooms where people had cried, shouted, fallen silent, and done it all again through his voice. Today, the hallway was still bright, but with every step, Caleb shed a layer of his old shell. The shell of detachment, of neutrality, of what they called professionalism. He passed the guard's desk. The familiar officer looked up as if about to ask something, then didn't. Maybe he knew, maybe not. Like everyone else here, he didn't ask. Caleb offered no goodbye. None was returned. The iron gate slid open in front of him. Its long screech sounded like time itself being cut slowly open. No one saw him off. No one stopped him. He stepped outside. The midday El Paso sun struck hard across his forehead. But for the first time in years, Caleb didn't raise a hand to shield it. He was no longer one of the inside, and no longer the cold shadow of himself. Before leaving El Paso, Caleb went back to the interpreter's office one last time. No one stopped him. No one noticed. His name had already been removed from the staff roster, but his keycard still worked, perhaps because no one had bothered to revoke it, perhaps because no one thought it mattered. The office was empty, lights still on, desks covered with the thinnest layer of dust, just enough to show no one had sat there in days. Caleb walked to his old desk. Everything remained: the locked computer, the unsorted folders, the empty coffee cup tilted beside the pen holder. He opened the bottom drawer on the left, the one where unfinished translations and special files used to be kept. And there it was, the appeal. The letter he had written in the middle of the night after reading Sophia's transfer notice. The one in English, stripped of ornament, holding only truth, words he thought anyone would see if only they cared to read. But no one had read it. The envelope was intact, sealed, unopened, no stamps, no notes, no reply. Caleb slid the paper out. It wasn't yellowed, creased, or smudged, as if it had never existed in the real world. His eyes lingered on the header: Appeal against deportation, humanitarian grounds, and beneath it, his own signature. The man who had translated thousands of words, but only once dared to speak for someone else in his own name. And that had gone nowhere. The system had rejected it, automatically, without reason, without review. Not wrong, just unnecessary. Caleb folded the letter again, but this time not to file it away. To keep it, he tucked it into his old notebook, beside Sophia's handwritten note, beside Val's photograph, beside the things no one else would ever see. Before leaving the office, he paused to look around once more. The swivel chairs, the stacks of files, the dead clock on the wall. This place had once been his world. Now he was no longer part of it, no longer an interpreter, no longer a go-between, no longer a loudspeaker repeating pain in bureaucratic form. He stepped out, closed the door, didn't lock it, didn't look back, because the only thing he carried with him was what had once needed to be heard. That afternoon, Caleb drove out of El Paso. The highway lay empty, the sky a deep blue, wind rushing past the windshield like waves of dry sand. He didn't turn on the radio, didn't make a call, didn't think about work. Each mile carried him farther from the desk, from the sessions that had become muscle memory. But it also carried him closer to the place where other people's real lives were still being held, broken, relabeled. Near the border, he turned onto an old dirt road once used by patrol trucks, now abandoned. A few miles in, he stopped on a rocky rise overlooking the stretch of low buildings, the detention centers. From a distance, they looked like rows of shipping containers pressed together, silent, motionless. But Caleb knew inside those steel walls lived voices that had never been fully heard. He stepped out of the car. The dry wind struck his face. Twilight fell, the sun sinking behind a horizon smeared with red dust. He stood there, not searching, not expecting anyone to appear, not waiting for a miracle, just standing there, like a man who had once lived on the other side of the glass, hearing voices without ever seeing faces. Now, he saw the whole world that had been hidden behind every translation. Inside him there was no pain, no relief, only a vast silence wide enough to hold the echo of one sentence: "Thank you for listening to me as if I were a person." He couldn't save Sophia, couldn't keep her here, couldn't bring her back to Elias. But he had listened, and that perhaps was the first thing he had ever done, not as an interpreter, but as a human being. 3 weeks after leaving El Paso, Caleb stood at the gates of a juvenile detention center on the outskirts of Florence, Arizona. There was no sign, no marker, just a row of long, grey, container-like buildings behind a 2-story fence wrapped in barbed wire. Dry wind swept across the desert. Sun hammered against the car windshield like a fist. Caleb sat behind the wheel, his hand resting on an envelope containing an old file that read, "Morales Elias, 17, Guatemala." He didn't know if they would let him in. He had no appointment, no employee badge, no official title to present. Still, he stepped out. The guard at the gate eyed him with suspicion. Caleb handed over his ID, no lies,
I used to work as an interpreter in El Paso. There's a boy here. I need to see him. It won't take long.
The guard said nothing, radioed in. Another officer appeared, then a third. 15 minutes later, Caleb was led into a small office to wait. The walls were covered with bilingual notices, photos of juveniles in orange uniforms, faces turned away. No laughter, no footsteps. A middle-aged woman entered, badge on her chest. Monsieur Rivera. Her voice wasn't cold, but firm.
You're not a guardian, not a lawyer, not family. I can't arrange a visit with the boy.
I'm not here as any of those. I just need to know one thing.
He slid the file across to her. Morales Elias.
Is he still here?
She looked at the name, hesitated. Her hands turned through internal records. Eyes flicked over a computer screen, the room filled with the rustle of paper. Then she nodded slowly.
Yes, the boy is still here. Healthy. Still under review. Awaiting decision.
Caleb exhaled. He didn't know what he had been hoping for. But that confirmation, a simple yes, was like a small breath of air let into a long-sealed room.
Thank you.
He rose to leave, but before he reached the door, Rivera spoke again.
Who are you to him?
Caleb paused, turned his back, but didn't meet her eyes.
I'm no one. I just heard his sister's story.
She asked nothing more. But before Caleb could step out, she moved to her desk and pulled a thin envelope from a drawer.
The boy wrote this, asked it to be kept for family. No one came to claim it. I think maybe you should keep it.
Caleb took it. He didn't open it. His eyes lingered on the careful handwriting across the front. Para Sofia. For Sophia. His eyes burned. Not from grief, but because after everything, some words still managed to find their way to where they belonged, even when the person they were meant for was no longer there. He folded the envelope gently, placed his hand over his chest, where his wallet still carried Sophia's note. They would never meet. They would never hand anything back to one another. But Caleb knew this. Between those two scraps of paper, he had become the keeper of memory. Caleb sat in his car, the thin envelope resting on his lap. Evening was falling. The sun burned red at the horizon like a heart split in two, bleeding color across the dusty sky. His hand rested on the envelope. The words on the front, Para Sofia, trembled under the last light of the day. Caleb had no right to open it, he knew that. The letter wasn't meant for him. But the only person who could read it was no longer here. And if no one read it, the words inside would vanish, as if they had never been written. He opened the envelope, carefully, slowly, as if what lay inside was more fragile than memory itself. A folded sheet of paper, blue ink, the handwriting unsteady, as if written with shaking hands. No greeting line, no date, just beginning. Dear Sophia, I don't know where you are now. They don't tell me. They only said you were transferred, and after that, no one mentioned you again. I remember the night you made me sleep against the wall, while you lay on the outside, shielding me from the wind. You said you couldn't sleep unless you heard me breathing. You said that just so I'd feel safe, didn't you? I'm not angry, not at all. Not that you didn't wait. I know you tried your best. If you're no longer here, I just want you to know. I've grown up. I won't let anyone separate me again. And if one day I get out of this place, I'll find you. Anywhere. As long as I know you once existed, I'll believe you still do. There was no name signed at the end. No need. Caleb knew every word was real, not because of how polished the sentences were, but because of the spaces between them. A child doesn't write like an adult. Elias didn't plead, didn't list his suffering. He only kept the softest fragments of memory, breath, wind, cold, and his sister. Caleb folded the letter, his lips pressed tight, as if holding back a sentence that should never be spoken aloud. Then he drew Sophia's note from his wallet, unfolded it, placed it beside Elias's letter on his knees. If one day my brother is released, and if I am no longer here, please tell him I never stopped waiting. One wrote, so as not to disappear. One wrote, so as not to be left behind. Caleb didn't know where to take these words. Who to give them to? What system they could ever be submitted to? On the way back, Caleb didn't turn on the GPS. He didn't stop at rest areas. He didn't call anyone. The car rolled through scorched land, past dusty checkpoints, past rusted warning signs. No passage, no stopping. 2 pieces of paper lay on the passenger seat. One from Sophia, one from Elias. Not filed in a record, not stamped with a barcode, not belonging to any system. They just existed. Caleb didn't know what he would do with them. Send them somewhere? Hand them to someone? Keep them? He wasn't even sure why he held on. Only that if he left them behind, he would no longer be himself. Maybe, he thought, he had once been the bridge between 2 people, but not anymore. Now he was only the one left behind. Keeper of 2 fragments that never reached their destination. Like 2 broken wings, unable to fly, yet still warm with human touch. Ahead, the sun began to set. Not brilliant, not triumphant, just a dim orange light sinking behind the dust-heavy horizon. Caleb pulled over. No reason, only to stand there for a moment. Wind drifted through the half-open window, carried the scent of hot earth and sounds without names, like whispers from another world where unspoken things still endure. He leaned his forehead against the steering wheel, eyes closed. In that darkness, no one called his name. No one waited for him. No question demanded an answer. But there was something in his chest no longer cold. Thank you for listening to the story. If you have any thoughts, feel free to share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Once again, I'm really happy to have you here. Don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing more stories about life together. Take care and see you next time.